Hello again, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Brand Alchemy. We're going to be getting started in about 5 minutes. I'm going to put on a piece of music so we can get settled in and say hello. So I'll set a timer. Where's my timer at? There we go. Timer. There we go. All right. So if you're here, I'd love to hear where you are in the world as we wait for the timer to get down.
Today was another sunny day for me, going, but hearing the sound of the real funk on dancing class. Rather than think that human being can do is to keep on standing and rise up like a flower underground, like a flower from underground. Rise up like a flower.
just get my everything all set up. So here we go. Welcome to another episode of Brand Alchemy. All right. So this is a weekly exploration into brand development, brand strategy, how to create a powerful brand, powerful business, and how to just be more effective at our craft. So today's episode is episode 6, and the focus of today is brand messaging. And this is part 1. There's going to be another part in 2 weeks to take it further, but for this week we're just going to start with part 1. And just a little bit of a recap. We've been every week been going through this process, this growth cycle. And last month was all about the seed, which is strategy, and we've now reached the end of that, and so now we're moving into phase 2, which is sprout, and that's where we start to get into identity messaging. So, just to show you real quick how this whole process works, we start with the seed. And if you want to know more about the specific elements here, you can check out the previous episodes that goes in depth into each of these. But basically, once we have our seed, which is essentially where we're at in the process right now, seed's done. So then we take that seed and we translate it to identity and messaging, which is what the sprout phase is all about. So it's basically what it looks like, what it says, what the concept is, all that good stuff. Generally, what we think of as branding, like the logo, the colors, all that kind of stuff, is what we get into in phase 2. So once phase 2 is done, we have our identity system, our logo, colors, messaging, that's cut and clear. Then phase 3 is taking those and then creating media, right? Website, books, blogs, whatever it might be, whatever you actually create, we're going to apply the identity and messaging to it. Right, and that's phase 3, and then finally phase 4 is where we take whatever we create and then we engage with real people, with our audience, through some sort of experience, and then we come full circle because through that engagement we learn a lot, and then we go back to our seed and we learn and we refine the seed and we kind of feed it back into the system, into the process, and round and round we go. It's kind of like growing a certain type of, growing seed and then going through the process of growing the plants and then, picking the best plants and then reseeding them so that ultimately we end up with a very, very sort of superior crop. So anyways, today we're going to be focusing on phase 2, sprout, which is identity. Now we're going to zoom in here. This is essentially the components of phase 2. So I'll get us oriented here. So we'll just start with these 2 interlocking circles. On the top is messaging, the bottom is aesthetics. Where those 2 interlap and work together is essentially the identity system, right? So one thing that I've noticed is that the messaging side of things is really speaking directly to the conscious mind. It's also speaking to the subconscious, but it's really like the thing that we engage the most with, right? Whenever we go to a website or interface with any sort of brand, really it's the words or the message behind whatever it is we're looking at that really like grabs us. And then on the flip side of that is the aesthetics, which is like, what is the feeling around the message? How does the message feel? Or like, what's the context? Like, what does the page look like that the words are on? And what I've noticed is that the aesthetics and the sort of look and feel is more of a subconscious thing, though it does feed into the conscious mind. It's not purely subconscious, but generally what I see here is there's an interplay between what's on the surface and what's beneath the surface, because our messaging, like what we say, is really speaking directly to the person, and then how we say it and the context through which it's said, like the texture and the color and all that stuff, is really speaking to what's beneath the surface, and those work together to create a full picture. So for today, we just want to stay focused on messaging. which is a very, very, very key part of the puzzle here. So words are powerful. That's the first thing that we need to understand and sort of take responsibility for here, is that words are very, very, very powerful. And in the context of branding and marketing and all these kind of things, what we're basically doing is utilizing words to create influence, right? It's utilizing words to get people to be interested in what you have, or get people to buy what you have, all these things. If we really look, kind of step back, it sounds a whole lot like casting magic spells, right? Which is basically just, the idea of a magic spell is that you have this right combination of words, and then you speak them and something happens, right? Or, more specifically in the case of like when you're in spell casting, think about like witches or whatever. Generally what you're doing is there's somebody on the receiving end, like you cast a spell on somebody and then they like carry out some action. So that's kind of like, nefarious side of things. But anytime we use our voice, anytime we communicate, we're basically casting spells. And I think it's the sooner that we can kind of like accept that truth, that our words are deeply powerful, and that we're literally just, our words are magic, then we can come into a better relationship with it and even be more effective with our use of language. But the truth is, like, our entire reality, our lives are built out of language. We're surrounded by language. And if it's not overt words, then it's a message beneath something, maybe an image we're being shown, but it's being shown to send some sort of message, right? So unfortunately, in the world that we now exist in, the vast majority of messages that are being broadcast are this kind of like a nefarious magic spell. It's a lot of times, advertisements are, it's just a huge mechanism to capture money, right? And it's usually at the detriment of the person on the receiving end. I mean, it all just depends on what it is you're saying, what you're offering, and all of that, and your integrity. But my point here is that however way we cut it, utilizing our voice, utilizing words, saying messages is magic. So the question is, are we doing, positive, beautiful, life-affirming things? Are we using language to manipulate people and to get what we want? And that's not what I want to condone. I think that we have a huge opportunity to use language and to use our message, our voice, in a way that changes things for the better. Still magic, though. So I love this quote: "The true alchemists do not change into gold; they change the world into words." I think like every one of these presentations, I've shared this quote because it's so poignant, and there's so much packed in there for such a simple quote. But it's true, it's the world is really made of words or language, like I said before. So here's the thing, is that your message, right, is really the heart and the soul of your brand. When people think about branding, usually the first thing they think of is like a logo, right? Or like a look and a feel, right? But that's the supporting elements, right? Your message, the sort of star of the show, and then the design and aesthetics surrounding it serve to amplify that message, right? So when there's harmony between what you're saying and how you're saying it, and the context through which you're saying it, through like the colors and all that, then the message gets even more potent, right? But if we don't have a clear and potent message, then any sort of design or aesthetics just is sort of like, it's a little bit shallow, or almost it's like lacking substance and depth, right? But when we have a clear, resonant message that touches people, and we say it in a way that is well crafted, it looks beautiful, it feels right, that's when some magic can happen. So that's all great. Words are magic, our message is the center of everything. So what do we do? Like, how do we come up with messaging, or how do we craft messaging for our brand? So it's really quite a simple 3-step process. And when I say simple, it's simple in the sense that we can look at it like this. But it's, all this stuff does take work, takes time. So basically what we're doing is we're taking our core message, which is just like the unpolished, the raw, the raw point that you're trying to communicate, the core message of your work, whatever it might be. And we're going to explore how to figure that out. But the key thing is that we just want to identify the core message first without trying to make it fancy. And then what we do is we apply a voice filter to that core message, and then out comes our branded message. So we'll talk about the voice filter too shortly. But this whole scheme, this whole idea, this concept really reminds me of the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon art, right? Where we basically have this white light, pure white light going through a prism, and then out on the side is this like brilliant display of color, right? Very similar to what we got here. This is the sort of like the core message is the white light. It's the, there's nothing fancy about it. It's just to the point. And then the filter, the voice filter, is what it goes through to take on a colorful shape, right? The branded message is the sort of colorful side of it coming out. If we look at this. So white light is the core message, the prism is the filter, and out comes the whole prism of light. So today we're going to be focusing on these first two elements, the core message and the voice filter. We're going to be doing another episode to talk about how to create the branded messaging out of these two things, and we'll be doing that in 2 weeks. So, okay. So we start with just the core message. There's three things I want to touch on too, which are really key parts of any messaging framework. And that's what we're essentially trying to do here is we want to create a messaging framework for ourselves, for our brand, so that we're not just making it up every time we sit down to write something or, maybe create a poster, whatever it is that we're trying to do to communicate. If we have a messaging framework, then we have something to pull from, to draw from. So we do work now so that we set ourselves up for the future. Otherwise, if we don't have any sort of messaging framework, we're going to have to reinvent the wheel every time we sit down to create any sort of messaging. So there's three key areas that are a good thing to start with. The core messaging is your vision, your mission, and your positioning. So we'll just start with vision. We talked a lot about vision. There's a whole episode on vision itself. And so if you've been following along and doing the work, you should have a semi-finished vision statement. And that's all you need at this point. Again, we're not trying to make anything that finished or branded. Nothing that we create at this stage is going to be on the website necessarily. It's just we're just identifying what is the core thing we're actually trying to say to begin with, and then we can figure out how to say it. So we start with vision, which is essentially answering the question of like, where are we going? Where is your brand going? And where are you taking your audience, right? And a vision statement doesn't need to be complex or long. It's just a statement, it's just, we're going here. My vision statement is something along the lines of a community of powerful creators that have actualized their true potential and as a collective have the ability to change the world. I'm still refining it, but that's basically that's the unrefined version of it. And it's clear enough for me that I feel resonant and I know what I mean, right? There's clarity. And that's really the key here is that we want, when we're figuring out our message, we want clarity, not fanciness. It's really easy to try to make it all fancy, but then, if we start with trying to make it fancy without having clarity first, then we end up with like a lot of word salad and complicated things, and it's just hard to understand usually. So once we understand where we're going ultimately with our vision, then we need to figure out how do we get there. And that's your mission, right? Your mission statement is how you are getting towards your vision, right? So it's like your vision is where you're headed and your mission is how you get there. So the vision is sort of like far away goal that we're working toward, whereas the mission is like the things you do today, tomorrow, next month, next year, right? So for me, you know, my vision has to do with building this community of empowered creators that have, you know, solid brands and all this stuff. How am I going to get there? Well, by facilitating these live classes, by blogging every single day, 5 days a week, and by facilitating the collab mastermind group, which I'm already all doing right now. So it's just like I just keep doing that mission, you know, and it's working towards the vision. Now, how I articulate that as far as like a finished mission statement, that's going to take some work. But I do know what my general mission is. You know, it's what I'm doing right now. So that's vision, or that's mission. Okay, so then the third thing here is your positioning. Okay, and your positioning is just basically how you're different, right? How you're unique up against other people or other businesses or brands that are similar to you, or just in the same market, right? It's what makes you stand out, right? It's like what are you doing differently that is going to make people want to go to you versus all the other people, right? So like in this picture, there's all these different options or people, right? But one of them really stands out, and it's going to stand out to a specific individual, which is what understanding who your audience is so crucial. And again, we have a whole episode on audience that I did before if you want to check that out. But the positioning is sort of merging who you're doing it for, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how it's different. And all those things merge into one statement. But the main focus is just answering the question of how are you different? Why should anybody choose you over the rest of them, whatever it is, whatever they are, right? So again, doesn't need to be fancy, it just needs to be clear. So vision, where am I going? Mission, how do I get there? Positioning, how am I different? How am I unique? What do I have? What sort of value do I create that others don't? So again, just keep it simple. All we need is just these core bits of messaging. So those three items, vision, mission, and positioning, are super important. Now we're going to look at kind of dive deeper into this messaging framework and look at this little scheme here, which is basically just our message basically answers the question of who, what, why, and how. And where those all overlap, who, what, why, and how, that's where our magic messaging is, right? So we'll just go through these one by one. So who, right? This is just who are you and who are you for, right? So this is, if you've been following along and you did the audience exercise, you know generally who your audience is. You know, when you go through the whole seed process, you're going to figure out your audience members. We're going to come up with ways to define them. And so what we're doing here is just kind of synthesizing it a little bit further. And we want to come up with some ideas as to the who. And here's a great quote to illustrate this point is, people like us do things like this. And this is Seth Godin. He's a brilliant marketer. And the whole idea is that humans are irrational, right? Like we tend to just follow suit of those around us. You know, it's like monkey see, monkey do, right? And so like all of our customs and traditions and all the things that we do on the daily basis, they're all completely arbitrary. And the reason they're so normal is just because everybody else does them, right? It's like every family, every friends group, every little tribe or squad of people, they all have this sort of common sense of people like us do things like this. And the people like us and the things like this change depending on who we're talking about, what they're doing, right? But every group of people, this statement is true. So we want to figure out who it is that we're talking to, right? Who are we and who are we talking to? Generally, there's going to be a similarity there. So next is what, right? So who are we? Now, what do we do, right? So this is just getting really clear on like, what do you actually do, right? So in my case, I do brand strategy and design. I create and experiences. I create music and DJing, these sort of things. So these are just, all we're really looking for is just like kind of bullet items of what. And I love this quote by Mark Anthony. If you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. That's so true. So what do you do? That's the question. Okay, and then how? Like, so the question that we're asking here is, how do you do what you do? And what we're looking at is like not the mechanical nuts and bolts, but like the quality of how, right? Like, what's the vibe? What's the tone? What's the voice? What's the sort of like aesthetic of what you do, right? And this is really important to get right, because as Arnold Bennett says, and anybody that's been in a long-term relationship can agree, that 10% of conflict is due to difference in opinion and 90% is due to wrong tone of voice. It's really true, and this absolutely applies to branding, right? We could have the right message, but if we just don't say it in a way that's resonant with what we're saying, then the whole thing just might not land, right? It might get taken even the wrong way. I mean, how often does that happen when you say something to somebody and then they take it in a completely different way because the way you said it was, it was a certain way that triggered something for them, right? So it's just really important to be aware of the not only what we're saying, but the actual tone of how we're saying it. And then lastly is why, right? And this one's really important. This is like why are you doing what you're doing? Why is it important? What are your values? What are your beliefs surrounding your work or your marketplace, or whatever the context of your craft? And Simon Sinek says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. Couldn't have said it better myself. So we can put all this together and figure all this out in an easy way using this messaging framework, right? So really all you got to do, it's so simple. You just create 4 columns like this with titles on each column of who, what, how, and why, right? And then the exercise that I do is you just write some things, who am I, artists, creators, right? You can just fill it out, and oftentimes I'll just set a timer, 10 minutes per column, right? Maybe even 5 minutes, and just come up with, who are the people that you are for, right? Who am I and who am I for? So then, same thing, you go to what, fill it out. What do I do? Just list things out. Don't need to be fancy. We just need to be clear. And then how, right? How do I want to communicate? And if you've been following along and you did the seed, you know that there was actually a whole column on voice in the essence brand attributes section. So, we've already gotten clarity on a lot of these. It's just a matter of like taking further and refining further. And then finally is why. This is just like, what are your core beliefs, the core values that are at the heart of what you're doing, and give you a good reason to move forward and give other people a good reason to care or be enrolled. So let me just show you a couple examples of finished ones here. So this was mine that I did about a couple of months ago. Now, here's the thing I just want to remind you all is like, don't try to make this perfect, right? This whole process I'm teaching with Brand Alchemy, it's not like a one and done thing. You get through the phases and you're done and you have a brand and it's over, right? It's an ongoing process. Like building your brand is building your reputation, right? There's no end to that. And so there's always going to be refinement. So it's just, I'm a really big believer of like, just get it good enough, get something done, put it out there, learn, feedback, and refine, tweak it. So anyways, I just made a list of things and then highlighted the top 3 that I wanted to sort of base my messaging on, right? So who? It's powerful creators, conscious entrepreneurs, and audio artists. What do? I do brand alchemy, creative synthesis, and experience design. And there's all these other things too, but like those are the kind of top level ones. How do I do it? My voice, my vibe, my tone is soulful, visionary, philosophical. Or at least that's, what I'm going for at least. And then why, right? What are some of my core values? Like, cultural transformation is a really big, like, I really honestly believe that we have the power to change the world. We always have, and it's always just it's just individuals that take responsibility and then make change happen, right? It's always been like that. Also, growth and empowerment is key, right? So this is all about, it's on one sense, like all the stuff I'm doing with branding, there's this personal growth and empowerment thing kind of mixed into it, right? And then lastly is mythic life, right? Just living a more mythic, more meaningful life. So that gives me like a lot to work with when I'm working on my messaging. So here's an example of a client that I'm currently working with. It's a mental health nonprofit. So we identified that their primary who they're working, who their main audience is knowledgeable philanthropists, right? Very like intelligent, wise, smart people, philanthropists. What do? They do fundraising, they do research, and they raise money, they facilitate research, and they educate based on what they discover. That's really what they do. Now, we were talking about mission before. That's a lot of this is resonant with that, right? Because your mission is it's literally just what you do, okay? But again, I just want to remind you, at this point, all we're looking for is just these little like seed nuggets of language, of messaging, and just to like clarify some of these things, but not try to like make it perfect or make it sound nice yet. We're going to get there. Okay, so how? Voice and tone. So what we went with them was honest, empowering, and human. And then lastly, the why, the big why, like their beliefs and values, right? Their primary thing is that the system, the mental health care, pretty much all systems are broken, it seems like, but the mental health care system in particular is really broken. And it's, yeah. So anyways, that's their main big thing is like revolutionizing mental health care. And that's actually their vision is to revolutionize mental health care. So the vision kind of ties in here too in an interesting way, at least with them. Another thing important is this idea of like positive psychology, right? And then freedom for all. So one of the things in the psychology world or in psychiatry is just there's a lot of people that get forced treatment and that are subjected to treatments that are not, they don't have any say in it, right? They're just being subjected to these treatments that are usually like not cool what's happening, right? So that's a big thing for them is they want to somehow work towards creating more empowerment and choice for people that are receiving care. So that's it. It's so simple. You just come up with some ideas, jot them down for who, what, how, and why. And that will really help clarify what is the base of your messaging. Now, the one that's really, really, really important here is the why, these beliefs and values. And we want to really come up with a lot of ideas here because each one of those beliefs or values that we come up with, when we get to the when we start to create our branded messaging, right, where we take these ideas and then turn them into something polished that can be put on your website or whatever. Each one of these beliefs and values is like a seed for messaging, right? So we could literally just take any idea, like be human as an example. And actually, sorry, let me back up. So when we're done with this, see this filter part, that's clarified through what we have here in the how column, right? So honest, empowering, and human. That's the voice filter. So we want to take whatever the core message is and we want to say it in a way that's honest, empowering, and human, right? So in their case, right, we would be taking, revolutionize mental health care. How do we say that in a way that's honest, empowering, and human? Well, once we figure that out pops the branded message for that specific thing. So each one of these lines is like, gives us something to work with. So again, that's all we're really doing is we're just identifying what's the core point we're trying to say, and then how do we need to say it, which is the filter, and then what do we ultimately say to that's on brand, if that makes sense. And that's basically it. It's quite simple. It just takes a little bit of work. And so what we just went over is basically, it's kind of half of this messaging circle should be divided again in half, because there's, again, the core message and then there's the branded message. And we want to create a distinction between the two, because if we try to do it all at once, then, it can be frustrating and we can struggle to make progress because we're not distinguishing the difference between like what we're trying to say and how we actually need to say it, right? So the next steps to work on your messaging, to figure out what your messaging is for your brand, is to create your messaging framework, right? Just like what I showed here. 4 columns: who, what, how, and why. Super simple. Figure that out. And then secondly is to work on articulating your vision, mission, and positioning, but in a branded way, right? Like, so again, don't try to make it something that sounds fancy that you're going to put on your business cards or whatever. Just get clear on what the point actually is, right? So that a 5-year-old could understand. And then you'll be equipped to actually put it through this whole process of taking that core message you create, applying your voice filter to it, and then out pops your branded message. Pretty nifty, huh? Okay, so that's all for this week. We're going to be continuing the messaging process, not next week, but the following week, because next week we are going to dive into aesthetics. Because what I find is that these work hand in hand. The aesthetics and the message, they do go hand in hand. So that's why we want to kind of go back and forth. So over the next 3 sessions, we're going to kind of go back and forth between aesthetics and messaging, just like this. And so what we're going to be looking at next week is just introducing this idea of aesthetics and the role that aesthetics play in branding. We're going to look at how to create a stylescape to get our visual direction established, right? This is one of my favorite parts of the whole process, and I'm really excited to share it with you. It's really, really fun. So essentially what we're doing here, next week, we're going to start turning words into words into worlds, just like that quote. True alchemist doesn't change lead into gold. They change the world into words. And then I would go so far as to say, and then they change those words into worlds. So that's what we're going to be doing next week, is beginning to turn all of our words into worlds. That's it for this week. If you would like clarity, support, and momentum in your process of creating your brand and growing your craft, then I invite you to consider joining the Brand Alchemy Lab. So we're just a community of powerful creators, and we meet weekly and work on our businesses together, work on our brands together, and it's an amazing group. We're doing this by application only, just to make sure that the quality of the group is as best as it can be, and that everybody's of a similar mind, heart, and soul. So if you would like to learn more about that or see if it's a right fit, just hit me up at andy@opulentcreative.com and we can have a chat. So that is all for now. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that this live stream was helpful, and I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with your messaging framework. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.